Americans. There are many things you can say about them, and they have achieved incredible feats in almost every arena of human endeavour. But when you are asked to think of the quintessential American defined by popular culture and over half a millennium of history, there is one image that comes to mind. An image so ubiquitous it influenced how the country is perceived both domestically and abroad for nearly a century. When foreigners of the 1930s thought of America, they thought of the wide and rolling prairie, a free man out west, a free man and his gun. Now, as we know, the romanticism of the Wild West is purely mythical, as is a lot of things people think about America. But the image persisted throughout the 20th century, spawning an entire genre of foreign films and some of the best westerns ever made. The slang term cowboy being used for Americans was as common as Yank in some parts of Europe, in Germany especially. But as widespread as that myth became, their abilities with firearms is not mythical in the slightest, nor is it even an exaggeration. In the twists and turns of fate that is life, I ended up practically being adopted by a family from Texas, and I learned firsthand that the stereotypes were stereotypes for a reason. Famous gunslingers like Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, and the famous Ranger with the big iron litter American history and folklore. But the greatest of them all are not found in the Wild West. Rather, they are found in the war-torn skies of foreign lands, as American aviators decided to take their gunslinging to the next level. This is the story of the pilots who shot down enemy aircraft with just their big irons. But first, like any good piece of American propaganda, we need to indulge in some shameless capitalism. Let me ask you, dear viewer, what do you want out of a mobile game? Standards have gotten pretty high these days, so I'm sure you demand nothing but the best, and if you want the best, you really have only one place to turn to. A place with over 700 awesome champions, a place that has constant updates bringing you content rendered in some of, if not the best graphics out there. A full set of upgrades, war gear, and loot systems combined with intense turn-based PvE and PvP combat. You know what time it is, ladies and gentlemen. This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. That's right, everyone. Raid is back with not one, but two special events. First is their new hardcore story, which is some of the toughest content they've ever released, The Cursed City. A month-long excursion to the accursed city of Sintranos, with 100 stages to complete across 4 districts. The city is currently under the rule of Amius the Lunar Archon. You'll need to clear stages of differing types across the 4 districts to hunt down 3 Eclipse keys before taking on Amius himself. You get new artifacts as well as special cursed remnants, which you can use to summon epic and mythical champions. It's a good thing I still have Axeman with me, though, to take on this mighty challenge. The other event, of course, is celebrating our favorite holiday and the big man himself. Raid A Christmas Story, a holiday-themed event where you can follow Sir Nicholas through a festive and fun story, complete with minigames, prizes, tournaments, and events, as well as a few surprises. It's going to be an incredible time. Just go to www.raidxmas.com, and for all you new players, just click my link in the description or scan the QR code right here, and you can get 2 epic heroes, Lightsworn, and once you hit level 15, the epic boss killer Juliana. So just hit my link in the description to come play one of the best games out there, and thank you to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. So, pistols and air combat. It may seem ridiculous to discuss in the modern day, and to be honest, it has always been ridiculous. Nevertheless, the humble sidearm has been a permanent tool in an airman's arsenal since the very dawn of military aviation. Not as a tool for engaging enemy aircraft, but rather for self-defense should such an aviator find themselves forced down in enemy territory or in an otherwise hostile environment. One day I'll need to talk about the time the Soviets invented a space shotgun for their cosmonauts to fight bears, and no, I'm not joking. However, as the imperial powers of the early 20th century, locked in the death struggle of the Great War, turned more and more to air power, the concept of air-to-air combat began to develop. At the start of World War I, airplanes would only be used for recon missions against enemy troop movements and enemy fortifications. The pilots would fly over enemy territory, photograph hostile forces in their positions, fly back home, and provide that valuable intelligence to the general staff planning the war. As you can imagine, this led to a rather awkward situation as both sides could see literally everything the other side was planning and doing, and maneuver accordingly. meaning every move was countered perfectly with no one gaining an advantage. Combine that with the new implements of modern warfare, trains, machine guns, long-range artillery, tanks, etc., and you have an impossible situation, leading to the now famous stalemate across no man's land. While this was all going on, the pilots of both sides would very often come into contact on their missions over the front lines. And at first, it was almost a sportsmanlike affair, with opposing pilots waving to each other as they flew by. But given the efficacy of the intelligence they were gathering, it occurred to everyone that some sort of effort should be made to prevent the enemy's planes from flying back to base with all those valuable photos and maps. Thus, aerial warfare was born. At first, the airmen armed themselves with whatever came to hand. Blunderbusses, bricks, metal darts, old hunting rifles, and of course, pistols. They would use this for air-to-air combat and of course to drop on the unsuspecting infantry down below. The issue was, these weapons were improvisational and damn near useless at hitting targets going 150 miles an hour across 3 dimensions of movement. The pistol, while capable of firing multiple shots, only had a very small projectile, and so you had to get very, very close to do any damage, if you could even hit the target, which in an early aircraft was damn near impossible. You're going at high speeds in open air, 10,000 feet up, oil spraying all over your face with 1900 era goggles on, in what amounts to a kite with a lawnmower on the front, buffeting about in unstable European air, which usually had awful weather. Long story short, this didn't happen. Also, that movie is terrible. Like, genuinely awful. Don't watch it. Ever. Almost everything in it is wrong. Why are all the triplanes red? Yagishwara 1 was called the Flying Circus because of their myriad of different designs. The Red Baron got his name by being unique. It doesn't make sense if they're all red. And why do they have so many triplanes anyway? Only a small number of DR-1s were available. The majority flew Albatrosses. And where the hell is the Spad? It's the most iconic American aircraft, or, well, French-built American aircraft of World War I. Why are there only Newport 17s? God, I hate flyboys so much. The way everyone got around this problem was, of course, mounting a machine gun to their aeroplanes. This was done initially by either building pusher-design aircraft, that being placing the engine behind the crew compartment, allowing them to mount a machine gun in the front on a turret so it could face forwards, or simply just putting a gunner in the back for self-defense and not worrying about the whole thing at all. It was then that French aviation pioneer turned fighter pilot Roland Garros had an idea. What if we mount the gun in a fixed position facing forward? That way we could maneuver the aircraft to shoot the target. And then we could time the machine gun to shoot through the propeller's gaps while it's spinning. He worked with his friend and legendary aviation engineer Raymond Saulnier to develop this concept. But French machine guns were, as with a lot of French technology, a bit shit. Meaning they couldn't be timed reliably with the engine's RPMs. The solution they came up with to overcome this problem was basic and French. Their solution was to put steel wedges on the back of the propeller to reflect the bullets that didn't go through to avoid damaging the blades. This, of course, risked reflecting ricochets right back at the pilot's face, but as the saying goes, no guts, no glory, do it, no balls. And so, off he went. Roland Garros would eventually shoot down several German aircraft with this method, and is widely considered to be the first true fighter pilot. However, this didn't last long because he was very soon forced to crash behind enemy lines when the fuel line of his aircraft jammed up. When German engineers captured his plane and saw his design, well, they had a German response. They had an aneurysm. The solution was so primitive and so, well, French, it offended them on a visceral level. Thus, they took it to their premier aircraft designer, the Dutch engineer and yet another aviation legend, Anthony Fokker, who also looked at this and went, "This is a travesty against my profession as an engineer, I must fix it, it's going to drive me insane." And so he did, inventing the first reliable interrupter gear, allowing aircraft to fire through their propellers. The era of dogfighting was thus born. The humble sidearm left its combat-focused role and instead served one of two purposes. It would serve self-defense if the pilot should find themselves trapped behind enemy lines, or, in World War I at least, if their aircraft caught fire. Without parachutes, there was only one painless way out of that situation. And so everyone thought that this is the way it would stay. Aircraft were steadily becoming more heavily armed and they were going faster. So much faster, in fact, that people thought even the dogfight would die out as well. But, like the dogfight, the humble pistol hadn't yet seen its last hurrah. March 31st, 1943. World War II is in full swing, and at an airbase in Pandesvar, India, the 7th Bomb Group, 9th Bomb Squadron, were prepping their B-24 Liberators for a mission. The consolidated B-24 was a masterpiece of an aircraft for its time. It had a big bomb load, twin 50 cal turrets covering every angle of attack, a decent operational ceiling, exceptional range even for aircraft of the time, and a great top speed for a heavy bomber, topping out at around 300 miles an hour. It was for these reasons the B-24 received priority for the Pacific as well as maritime patrol over the Atlantic. Being able to go very far very quickly is important when flying over oceans. However, the B-24 had a rather nasty flaw that set it apart from its much sturdier cousin, the B-17. It was very prone to fire. And it was this weakness which would prove the undoing of today's first hero. Lieutenant Owen J. Baggett, born rather appropriately in Graham, Texas. Owen Baggett grew up just like any other Texan boy did, comfortable around guns from an early age and rather outdoorsy. But he had heard the call of the American dream and wanted to strike it rich, and so, after graduating with honours from Hardin-Simmons University, he set off to the East Coast, eventually landing a job on Wall Street as a broker for defence-related industries. And with rearmament kicking off to feed the Lend-Lease program now spinning up for Britain and the Soviet Union, it looked like he had it made. And then... yeah. So, with his higher education and his duty calling, he signed on for the United States Army Air Force as a pilot candidate, and he got accepted, graduating with his wings on July 26, 1942. Fast forward back to 1943, and he, along with his squadron, were tasked with bombing a railway bridge along the railway line between Rangoon and Mandalay in Burma. With their commander, Colonel Conrad Neckerson, leading the way, the 12 B-24s took off, formed up, and headed to their objective, climbing to altitude as they went. Unfortunately, as they crossed the border into Japanese-held territory, their presence was detected, and the 64th Sentai of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service scrambled their 13 Ki-43s to respond. The Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar, or to use its proper name, the Hayabusa, Japanese for peregrine falcon, was commonly nicknamed the Army Zero due to the similarities between it and the famous Navy fighter made by Mitsubishi. Like most Japanese fighters, the Ki-43 is lightweight, exceedingly agile, and relatively fast in both top speed and especially climb. But of course, the downsides are the same. The lack of self-sealing fuel tanks makes it easy to kill if you hit it, and the lightweight frame mean the armament isn't very potent, with only 2 forward-firing machine guns. Nevertheless, these mid-war Ki-43s are packing 2 50 cals in the nose, and one well-placed burst is all they'd need to take down a bomber. As the Americans approached their target, the 64th Sentai began their attack. Outnumbered and without fighter escort, the B-24s didn't stand a chance. The Japanese tore through the formation, their guns blazing, severely damaging several aircraft on the first pass. Baggett, the co-pilot in the second bomber, fought to keep his B-24 on an even keel, even after taking so many hits, but his efforts would be in vain. The second wave of Ki-43s now bored in on the formation and opened fire. Tracer rounds bored into one of the primary fuel tanks, setting Baggett's airplane ablaze. With the onboard fire suppression systems being completely ineffective as the crew desperately sprayed extinguishers, the captain of the aircraft, Lieutenant Lloyd Jensen, ordered the crew to bail out. But Baggett, refusing to leave his friends behind, instead climbed into the top turret of the bomber while his aircraft was on fire and began engaging the Japanese fighters as the rest of the crew jumped. Once everyone else had safely made their escape, he got out of the gun, tightened his parachute harness, and yeeted himself into space, pulling the cord as he went. But as the title of the story suggests, this would not be the escape it appeared. As the crew of the doomed bomber floated down, one flight of the Ki-43s broke off and began shooting at the men dangling helpless from their silk canopies. 2 of the American airmen were killed instantly by direct hits, while a near-glancing shot lightly wounded Baggett's left arm. Realizing his odds of survival were near zero should the enemy re-engage him, our hero feigned death by hanging limply in his parachute, hoping his ruse would deter further attack. But his hopes were quickly dashed as one of the Ki-43s peeled off and slowed down to get a closer look at him. The Japanese pilot opened his canopy and began circling, doing half loops and slow rolls to burn off speed and get even closer. He had absolutely no idea that Lieutenant Owen J. Baggett from Texas was hoping he would do just that. The moment he got within range, the American drew his M1911 Colt 45 and fired 4 shots at the enemy plane, an act of what he believed to be suicidal defiance, only to watch in disbelief as the Ki-43 suddenly jerked upwards, heeled over, and went into a spin, falling away beneath him. Lieutenant Baggett had done what no other pilot had done before. He had just shot down an enemy aircraft with a pistol. Or had he? The story is an excellent one, and there is little doubt that the engagement itself took place, but there are conflicting reports on whether Lieutenant Baggett had actually shot down the Japanese plane or simply just wounded the pilot and scared him off. Colonel Harry Melton, commander of the 311th Fighter Group, who was also shot down that day on a different mission, claimed to have met a Japanese colonel who had witnessed the crash site with a pilot found dead via a pistol bullet to the head. However, Colonel Melton was killed while being transferred to Japan aboard a prisoner-of-war hell ship when it was sunk by a US Navy submarine, so he could not corroborate his story for the record later. There are also rumours that other Japanese officers heard the story, either from word of mouth, Baggett's crew, or Melton, and were subsequently impressed by his feat of martial skill, truly worthy of Bushido and a samurai warrior, as it were. The problem is, when evaluating the 64th Sentai's combat records, none of their aircraft were shot down that day, and nor were any of their pilots taken off combat duty, meaning that if Lieutenant Baggett did shoot down or otherwise disable his attacker, according to official documents, the Japanese pilot was able to recover from the spin, as well as the shock from being hit by an American in his parachute, and he was able to return to base safely. Whichever version of the story is true, it still took some serious balls to take on a top-of-the-line enemy fighter plane with nothing more than a 45. Even so, whether it happened or not, it doesn't count as a confirmed kill, just a cool story. A very cool story, in fact, but just a cool story nonetheless. And yet, the 1911 does have a confirmed air-to-air kill during World War II, and in my opinion, this one is even more badass. The date is April 12th, 1945, and 2 American divisions are racing like hell towards the Elbe River. Beyond that river lies the grand prize, the objective every young Allied fighting man has been working towards from day one. The grand old city, rising like a spire in the distance beyond the Elbe, is Berlin. Leading the race is a unit I am actually planning to write a book about, the 83rd Mechanized Division. However, if you search the records, you won't find a unit with that name or title. The only 83rd Division you'll find is an infantry division. They are, however, one and the same. The 83rd Infantry Division's official nickname was the Thunderbolt. Veterans of Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge, Hurtgen Forest, and the first American division to reach the River Rhine. But everybody knew them by their unofficial moniker, a title bequeathed to them by the war correspondents left in awe at the speed of their advance. The 83rd had become a mechanized division upon entering Germany due to the standing orders left by the commanding officer, General Macon. Anything with wheels is ours. No questions asked. And so they became known as the Ragtag Circus, equipped with everything from stolen King Tiger tanks to cement mixers, school buses, and fire engines. They stole so many vehicles, they even carjacked a German general who joined their convoy thinking it was his own men. Literally, his staff car pulled up only to be met by a bunch of M1s, and they didn't even take him prisoner. They stole his car, painted a white star on it, and said, "Get walking west, buddy, we're taking your vehicle," and just left. That's how they got the name the Ragtag Circus. And this unit was locked in a vicious struggle, a race with their bitter rivals, the 5th Armored Division. And it really was a bitter rivalry. The commander of the 5th Armored Division was heard to say, and I quote directly, "I'm not going to be beaten to Berlin by no infantry outfit." And attached to the 5th Armored Division was 1st Lieutenant Dwayne Francis and his Stinson L5 Army Cooperation plane, which he had named Miss Me. It's a great name. And he was joined by his observer, 2nd Lieutenant William Martin. Their job was to recon ahead of the American advance and relay intelligence on any enemy positions they found. Once that was done, they would then switch to an artillery spotting aircraft and remove said positions with exceptional amounts of prejudice. American prejudice, otherwise known as high-velocity democracy. On this particular day, Lieutenant Francis was flying Miss Me towards the front line on his regular patrol. The 5th Armoured was falling behind the 83rd, and so they were rushing to make up time. Upon reaching the Vanguard unit, currently heading towards one of the few remaining bridges, the American airmen began scouting ahead. It was then Lieutenant Martin, in the back seat, spotted movement about 2,000 feet below them, flying just over the treetops. Calling it out to Francis in the front seat, they adjusted course towards the contact. As they got a bit closer, they were able to identify what they were looking at. It was none other than a German Army Cooperation plane, namely a Fiesler 156 Storch. And right at this very moment, a look was shared between the two men. Dwayne looked at Will. Will looked at Dwayne. Two young Americans. Two young American military aviators, no less. It was a completely silent communication. But it was all the communication required. Lieutenant Francis reached over and keyed his radio transmitter, talking to his liaison in one of the Sherman tanks below. "Enemy aircraft spotted. We are about to give combat." The tankers themselves exchanged a look, though this one was one of disbelief. He said what? Using their superior altitude, the L5 dived after the Storch, whose pilot was at this moment completely unaware that he was being hunted. He would soon be alerted to that fact, however, as the two American airmen pulled up right alongside him, and as though they were in modern Los Angeles, they did what can only be described as pure, unmitigated gangster. Opening the side doors of their aircraft, both pilot and observer drew their 1911s and began exercising their God-given Second Amendment rights, emptying almost all the magazines they had on them into the offending German plane. The two Germans in said plane couldn't believe what they were seeing. Furthermore, the enemy was only 10 yards off their wing, which meant they couldn't turn the MG-34 in the rear to return fire. A veritable hailstorm of 45 ACP smashed through the cockpit of the enemy plane until eventually one round found its mark, slamming into the pilot's foot. This caused him to jerk the rudder pedal, sending the Storch into a spin, and this close to the ground, that only had one result. The German aircraft spiraled into the ground and cartwheeled to a stop in a nearby field. Martin couldn't even contain his exultation. He was screaming, "We got him! We got him!" into the radio as the men of the 5th Armored Division looked on, completely dumbfounded, and then started moving towards the crash site at great speed. But they wouldn't get there first. Without thinking, Francis immediately cut throttle, put his flaps down, and landed alongside the crashed Storch. Its pilot and observer were still climbing gingerly out of the wreck when the two Americans, pistols drawn, ordered their surrender. Realizing the game was up, the two men complied, and Francis holstered his weapon to render first aid. This action is not only documented in the war diary of the 5th Armored Division, but also in Cornelius Ryan's book, The Last Battle. And here is the photographic proof of the conquering heroes standing next to their prize, making it the only 100% photographically confirmed air-to-air kill with a pistol. And here ends our story. Or does it? Because while it's not a pistol, there is one more honourable mention I'd like to include. On January 12th, 1968, in the mountainous jungles of Southeast Asia, an American covert operation was underway. An operation to smuggle weapons, operatives, and, well, it's the CIA, so drugs. Lots and lots of drugs. The war in Vietnam was reaching its crescendo. VC units were growing larger and more aggressive by the day. Regular NVA units were encroaching ever further into the DMZ, and US air operations were ramping up. To support these air operations, neutral and friendly nations such as Thailand and Laos were used to provide divert fields for damaged aircraft, a place to refuel in case they couldn't hit the tanker, and in Laos's case especially, a useful spot for all the civilian, 100% legit, definitely not CIA transport company, Air America, to do their business. However, transport wasn't all they were doing. One of their operations was running a radar direction targeting radar designated Lima Site 85. For those unaware, it's a similar principle to the oboe or Knickerbein system from World War II, but instead of following a signal beam, they're guided manually by a forward air controller. Basically, the radar illuminates a target area, matching the precise coordinates on their radar screen with a map of the region, and then when the radar detects friendly aircraft trying to bomb a target, the operator can guide the strike package in manually onto the target with incredible accuracy. It was very effective. So effective, in fact, that the North Vietnamese Air Force wanted to get rid of it. Problem was, Air America had set up this site on a jungle-bound mountain up against a sheer cliff. Helicopters were the only practical way in or out, meaning that a VC or commando raid wouldn't be able to handle it. But at the same time, they couldn't exactly send a MiG flight to bomb it. Sending their few MiGs would be way too conspicuous, and anyway, they needed those MiGs to defend Hanoi. So the only thing for it was to send something a bit more covert. They would send a pair of AN-2 Colt transport biplanes, rigged to carry out ground attack. They could fly in low enough through the mountains and do it relatively quietly, which is exactly what they intended to do. However, things would not go to plan. As the AN-2s approached their target, they were detected, and an Air America UH-1D Huey just so happened to be stationed there. And I think, dear audience, you can see where this is going. Captain Ted Moore, and for you Call of Duty fans out there, this is a bit delicious, crewman Glenn Woods, scrambled to their helicopter and took off. As they beat a hasty retreat to get some altitude, the Vietnamese began their attack. Unfortunately for them, the security contractors at the radar site were rather heavily armed. The lead AN-2 was met with an ungodly barrage of small arms fire, sending it plunging into the jungle with a huge fireball. Understandably spooked by this, the second AN-2 immediately broke off their attack and bugged out north, straight into the path of the now airborne and very irritated airborne Americans. Captain Moore maneuvered his Huey above the Vietnamese aircraft and used his rotor wash to batter the biplane into submission. This caused the top wing to stall for lack of airflow, forcing the pilot to drop back out of the hurricane-force downdraft right into the sights of crewman Woods. Racking the bolt on his, tactically acquired AK-47, Woods opened up at point-blank range straight into the cockpit, killing the pilot and sending the AN-2 into a spin, resulting in yet another fireball. Just one more fireball in Southeast Asia to be sure, but it is significant, as it marks the CIA's first air-to-air kill, and the only instance of a helicopter shooting down a biplane. Well, unless you count that Biggles movie from the 1980s. Man, that soundtrack was a banger. And thus ends the tale of our American cousins and their infamous big irons. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to our sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. And I promise there is more aviation content coming very soon. Until then, I'll see you all next time.